even though we think of these processed foods as being devoid of nutrients, and they are, and to a large extent, they are, right? I'm not promoting people eat a bunch of processed foods, but at the same token, they're actually breaking down, the process is breaking down a lot of the, or a good portion of these pesticides that are, as you know, are so damaging to our health. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Labels. I'm Dr. Sina McCullough with my co-host, Joel Salatin. Hi, Joel.
Hi, Sina.
Okay, I want to get into a study that was just published, but I find it fascinating. But first, I want to ask you a question. Which do you think is healthier, organic processed food or conventional whole foods, such as conventional fruits and vegetables?
You're asking me?
Yes, and the listeners, let's all think about it. Which one do you actually think is healthier? Because go ahead.
Let's take a pause here to actually consider this. So the question is conventional whole foods, whole vegetables, whatever, versus organic processed. And of course, Sina, we've gone all around and around and around about organic. And so let's just, maybe we could say not organic, but just integrity, authentic, ecology food, just so we broaden this to not just certified organic government program food.
Exactly.
I would say that I would certainly take food that we're processing here and selling as processed food over conventional whole food any time of day. Our snack sticks, our chicken broth, things that our hot dogs, things that we do as processing. I would eat our hot dog before a conventional T-bone steak. Actually, I mean I think that's what you're talking about.
Yes. Now, so if you think about in the grocery store, most people are going in there and depending on the statistic, anywhere between 60 and 90% of the typical American's diet comes from processed food. Okay. So if you're going into the grocery store and they're picking, for instance, like organic chips or an organic cereal, that compared to if they went to the produce aisle and they picked up a conventional, let's say, strawberry, right? Containers of strawberry. So which one in that kind of example, which one would you think would be healthier? The organic processed food, like the organic chip or cereal, or the conventional container of strawberries?
Well, that's a hard one because strawberries compared to grains, I don't know. I mean, I guess, I think you're going to say the study is going to find the amount of residues in conventional strawberries outweighs whatever organic processing there is. But it's hard to compare cereal to strawberries. But if we had, let's say that we had organic strawberry puree, that would be a processed product. Organic strawberry puree versus conventional whole strawberries. I'd take the organic strawberry puree over the conventional whole strawberry.
Yeah, I would too. So we're in line, and part of this. The reason I'm asking these questions, the reason I'm trying to get people to engage in this kind of thought process is because it is generally accepted in this health wellness space that people should eat, or people are encouraged to eat whole foods, right? Even if they're conventional. So I hear this over and over again where people would say, oh, it's too expensive to buy, for instance, produce that was grown using organic practices. I keep saying organic as a simplified term, but you know what I mean. It doesn't have to be certified organic, but just produce that was grown without the pesticides, herbicides, and whatnot. So people will say it's too expensive. And across the board, the recommendation I hear from leaders in this field is go ahead and consume that conventional produce because it's healthier for you than processed foods, right? We hear this over and over. And my argument has been, well, that's not always the case, right? That is not always true. And now I want to show that this study just came out in October of this year. It was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. This is a peer-reviewed scientific publication, and I'll link it in the description box. And what they did was they took individuals who were consuming a Western diet, right? Everybody was consuming a Western diet. And then they changed their diet for 2 weeks. So everybody went on a Mediterranean diet, right? This is what is people think of as this healthy diet, right? Lots of vegetables, vegetables and fruits and fish and healthy fats. This is the Mediterranean diet. So all the groups went from a Western diet to a Mediterranean diet. One group ate only organic foods, right? They followed the Mediterranean diet, but they only ate organic foods. The second group, they also followed the Mediterranean diet, but they only ate conventional foods. All right. And then we did this for 2 weeks. Well, this is what the study showed. When the people switched from their Western diet, which was made up of mostly processed foods, right? Processed conventional foods. When they switched from that Western diet to the conventional Mediterranean diet with high fruit and vegetable consumption, they actually showed in their urine 3 times higher levels of insecticides and organophosphate intake. So basically more insecticides, pesticides in their urine. That's switching from a typical Western diet to a Mediterranean diet consisting of conventional foods. And now,
how much higher was that?
It was 3 times higher.
3 times higher.
And then get this. So then when you're comparing the group that the Mediterranean diet from conventional foods versus the Mediterranean diet from the organic food. Okay, the Mediterranean diet consisting of the conventional foods resulted in 10 times higher total pesticide intake. So if somebody went from a Western diet, they changed to a Mediterranean diet, so they're consuming more fruits and vegetables. They, in this study, they increased their pesticide intake 10 times, right? Compared to the people who went on the Mediterranean diet and consumed the organic version of that diet. So in a percentage wise, they said that the total pesticides found in the urine, it was 91% lower when the people were consuming the organic Mediterranean diet. I mean, this is amazing. You know, this flies in the face of what most people, most quote unquote experts in our field are espousing, right? When they're saying to you, oh yeah, you're eating a typical Western diet, just go ahead and, get on this Mediterranean diet or eat more fruits and vegetables. Even if you're not following Mediterranean diet, we always say, eat more whole foods, right? Even if you can't afford it, eat more conventional whole foods. And here this study is showing that may not actually be good advice.
Sina, so just to clarify, because I'm not sure I'm following the beginning of this, the folks who went into this study were consuming they were consuming the Western diet, mostly processed foods, not organic processed foods.
No, they were all on a Western diet, mainly
they were just eating regular,
conventional foods.
SpaghettiOs and DiGiorno's frozen pizza, blah, blah, blah. And they go on this Mediterranean diet. And even those people had a 3 times higher pesticide residue in their urine than they were on conventional Western.
Yes.
Is that because a lot of pesticides are broken down in the processing process?
So yes, I looked into this because let me answer that first, and then I'll get into my other train of thought. So yes, and I'm going to link to a couple studies so people can look at these for themselves. So there are studies published in the scientific literature that show that processing foods, so like for instance, applying heat to foods, can break down pesticides and different herbicides, and so So the degree to which they get broken down depends on the type of food, when it was sprayed, on that particular food item, and how it was actually processed. So you have all different kinds of processing that you can go through, like dehydrating or pasteurizing, milling. And we have studies to show what happens to these different types of pesticides. So part of it's going to depend on if the pesticide is water soluble or fat soluble, right? Because that depends on where it's going to be located in the fruit and vegetable. So, for instance, in juice, you can find residue levels in juice depending on, like, if the certain pesticide might be in the skin and or the juice. So the lipophilic residues, they are poorly transferred into the juice. So it would be largely retained in the skin. These are the ones that like fat. So the fat ones, the ones that are fat soluble. So it's very complicated is what I'm trying to say. And that's why I'm going to put some studies in here so you can look through it for yourself if you want to. But it depends on what kind of pesticide or insecticide or chemicals being used. It depends on that will determine where it is in that produce. And then it determines, did you peel it beforehand? Did you wash it beforehand? Did you boil it? Did you blanch it? Blanching has actually been shown to break down a lot of pesticides. So it is interesting that, even though we think of these processed foods as being devoid of nutrients, and they are, and to a large extent, they are, right? I'm not promoting people eat a bunch of processed foods, but at the same token, they're actually breaking down, the process is breaking down a lot of or a good portion of these pesticides that are, as you know, are so damaging to our health.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, often in the processing, you lose a lot of the base nutritional punch, if you will, the nutritional punch of a given food in the processing. So what we don't know is the reduction in nutrition worse than the increase in pesticides? That's a question these studies obviously didn't answer, but it is absolutely fascinating that that the amount of pesticides would go through. We know here, for example, on the farm, people sometimes ask us, about some of the practices that we do, and I'll give you an example. We have these very, very large compost piles here at Polyphase, and occasionally we might take an animal from somebody else. Maybe a cow dies at a neighbor's place, okay, and they don't want to spend $100 to have somebody come haul it away, and so we're happy to take an animal like that, put it in our compost pile, because the compost actually takes out antibiotics. It takes out all sorts of really cool things, partly because of the heat, but microbially as well. And so we trust nature's processing, if you will, the compost pile. We trust nature's processing to purify and sanitize things, that might be concerning. And so what this study is finding, I think, is an affirmation of that basic concept that these procedures, these chemicals do. I mean, even the industry, they'll say, well, the chemicals don't have a long residue. A lot of them actually are fairly unstable, and they're more unstable when there's a lot of activity going on in the soil through organic matter and through microbial activity. And that's the soil's way of processing toxicity out, is just with its biological activity.
Yeah, and I agree. And what we're finding is that even though they'll say, oh, this has a half-life of like 30 days or something, it breaks down, but then even in some cases, the breakdown product is still harmful to
Oh,
the
yeah.
human health, you know? So yeah, that's great to have that, you know, half-life information, but don't forget that now there's breakdown products still on like on that produce or in that soil, you know, that can still harm you. But yes, I think this is, you know, this is a fascinating study. Of course, it's one study, right? So you got to take everything with a grain of salt. But you and I grappled with this idea, with that initial question that I posed of the quote unquote organic processed food versus a conventional whole food, because in the book we wrote together, in Beyond Labels, we created a continuum, you know, of this is where this is totally unhealthy, and over here on this side is going to be the totally healthy food, you know, on the right hand side is healthy food. And the goal of the book was we want to try to help you move to the right of this continuum to try to increase your health, increase your personal responsibility, increase your trust in your food, right? So you and I had to actually come up with to solidify our thoughts onto a continuum. And I remember we debated this continuum for upwards of half a year, right? Because I was so determined that I did not want to have conventional produce on the continuum. And I thought, how am I going to actually, it has to show up somewhere on the continuum. How am I going to put it on the continuum, but not promote it? And so just in case someone hasn't read the book, our continuum goes processed foods, higher quality processed foods. Those are the organic processed foods. And then it goes into store-bought whole food, and then locally grown whole food, homegrown whole food. So the question was, okay, higher quality processed foods going to store-bought whole foods. All right. What are we going to actually, what tip are we going to give to people so that we don't make them sicker? Because I had heard over and over in the field, oh, just go ahead and switch from processed food to conventional produce because you're getting those nutrients, you're getting those antioxidants, you're getting those phytonutrients, which is also an overstatement, right? It depends on how it was grown, when it was picked, whatnot. So I did not believe in that, but most people, I would say in our area, think of that, that's dogma now, right? That's just what it is. And so what we did in the book, the very first real tip after harness your power and find a buddy, really the first one of substance is look for the 100% USDA organic label in your processed food. That's literally like that first tip that I wanted to get out there was immediately switch to organic processed foods, switch from conventional processed foods to organic processed foods. And in fact, when Acres magazine asked me, what's the number one thing people can do to improve their health if they can only do one thing? And I told them it's to switch to organic, not switch to whole foods, switch to organic. And now we're seeing some science as to why, you know, to support this statement. Now, and I want to get your input on this. I do want to say that I don't think that the question that I posed at the beginning, it's not actually the correct question, right? I posed that question because that's not even being asked. It's being assumed that the conventional whole foods are better. So that's why I pose that question. When I look at food, you know, you and I like to help people learn how to think about food. We want to share how we think about food, right? To help them make their own decisions using informed consent. So when I think about food, what I actually think of is which one is least adulterated. So I go situation by situation, right? I'm comparing two things like the conventional strawberries to the pureed organic strawberries, right? I go food by food, which one is less adulterated? Because unless you're growing your own and you know the inputs and you're picking it ripe, you know, off the vine or off the tree, there is adulteration that happens. And so that is the question I ask myself, is which one is less adulterated? So the question is actually too broad. It's actually reductionist thinking. And so that's how I actually approach food. But like we said in the book, we had to make a blanket statement. And that's why I just skipped over, you're not even promoting consuming conventional produce.
Yeah, at all.
at all.
Yeah, I think the way because you're right, Sina, it is so nuanced that you almost can't. It's almost so nuanced that you can't discuss it. It because there's so many threads, and what ifs that it just becomes a very complicated conversation. So if we just appreciate that that we're going to eat, chemical-free food, and then add into that produced on healthy soils that have high organic matter, but the thing is, when you start adding all these phrases, all these contingencies on it, people's, their eyes glaze over and they just can't follow you. So that's why the first thing was just, go organic. And that includes local producers who use organic procedure. Maybe we should just say, eat organic procedure and let it go with it. I just came up with that. That might be a better way because both of us know that the government certified organic program, now it certifies hydroponics. That's right. Certifies factory chickens. It certifies grain-fed feedlot beef. I mean, the main thing you get with the organic certification is the government program is no chemicals, and that's not nothing. I mean, it's significant as long as you can trust it.
But they still do allow some chemicals to be used.
Yeah, they do allow. So we're talking about organic production protocols. Whether it has a seal or a stamp or anything, the question is organic production protocols.
Yes, and actually, I found this study. I'll put this one on the notes too for people to look at. This was done in part with in partnership with the Environmental Working Group. This one was also just released in 2021 in August, and this was the most extensive study I'd ever seen in looking at conventional processed food versus organic processed food. They looked at almost 80 or about roughly 80,000 packaged foods, representing 85% of all food products sold to US consumers. So this is a good representative sample of what people are consuming on a daily basis that make up most of our calories. For the typical American. So what they found was that the quality of the ingredients in these processed foods, they improved as you moved from conventional processed foods to organic processed foods. So you had less ultra processed ingredients, you had less sugars, you had less trans fats, you had less sodium, more potassium. So when we say, stop eating conventional foods right now, right? That's one of the healthiest things you can do is even just stop eating those conventional foods, processed foods, and start eating the quote unquote organic processed foods. The reason is because it dramatically decreases your toxic burden on your body. So not only the amount of chemicals in the form of pesticides that you're eating, but as the study is showing, you're consuming cleaner ingredients. So less ingredients in each one, less ingredients that are ultra processed, less sugars, less trans fats. And yes, there's still trans fats in some foods. You're less likely to have colorings and artificial natural flavorings in those foods, iodized salts. You're less likely to have grass chemicals. So there is something to say
grass being not grass like your lawn, but grass. I'm just trying to keep the jargon, but in generally recognized as safe. This is the GRAS acronym from the Food and Drug Administration that allows a lot of dubious, even toxic ingredients to be put in food without any testing whatsoever, because they are generally recognized as safe, GRAS, grass.
That's right. And let's do a show on that because people have asked me about that. So let's bookmark that to do a show on that. But so you are making impacts on your health, even when you're just walking into the grocery store and instead of grabbing the conventional processed food, you're grabbing the organic counterpart to it. So, and you know, as I just laid out here, there are many benefits of it. Now, of course, I don't think, Joel, I think you'll agree with me on this. We are not promoting people go out and eat a bunch of processed, organic processed food, right? It still has its downside. It's still devoid of a healthy microbiome, for instance. It was still processed with heat. So you have different phytochemicals, phytonutrients, different enzymes that you've lost. These things are also broken down to a certain extent, along with the pesticides being broken down. So there is a trade-off. Like we said, there's a lot of nuances, but I think this study is fascinating. I think it gives us something to really think about. And I think it shows us how complex the situation really is when you're deciding what to eat. And it's, I think, in large part because of the complexity of our food supply.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And again, as you mentioned, in our book, we had this continuum. So while we park in this podcast scene, as we park on this issue, our continuum goes way on beyond to having your own garden, if you can.
That's right.
So that's where we're headed. But if you have to park somewhere, because most of us make changes incrementally, we don't do it all at once. And so as we make these incremental changes, what we're saying is it is actually better to have organic, could we say organic convenience processed food than it is to go over to the conventional pro. Now I think, Sina, we haven't mentioned this, but it would be better to get organic unprocessed.
Yes.
I mean, so if you can get Whole Foods, a CSA share, if you can from a local farmer or from the produce section of the supermarket, if you can get organic, a whole food, that beats organic processed. But that's not where we're parked today. We just wanted to spend a little bit parking on this idea of, well, I can't afford organic produce. And so I'll get conventional produce, and that'll let me have enough money to buy organic processed. And you'd be better, doing the organic processed food over the whole foods at the conventional aisle.
Yeah. And so I'm going to add a caveat to that because there is a layer of complexity. So this is what the study has shown. That's the conclusion of the study in essence. But like we said, for me, it's situation by situation. So I don't actually think it's appropriate to make a blanket statement and say, okay, if you're going to choose between this conventional produce and organic processed food, always choose the organic processed food. Because as you just nicely laid out, there's all these different caveats behind it. And then there's individual need. So maybe you are severely nutrient deficient and you're not going to get that nutrient from the processed food, like a vitamin C, but you might get some vitamin C from a conventional orange, right? So it's very highly individualized. And a situation by situation. So I don't want people to walk away with a blanket statement of I'm always going to go for, the organic processed food over the conventional produce, because that's not the whole point of this. The point is to get you to start thinking outside of the box of what a lot of these quote unquote experts are espousing, is that it's not that easy. Right. And that's why we're doing this podcast, is to help you navigate all these different nuances and better understand and better connect with yourself so you can make these decisions in real time on this situational by situational basis.
Sina, I got a question about that study, the one that we're featuring here. In the Mediterranean diet, and I know that I think think the Environmental Working Group has published like the nasty 10 or dirty dozen, of fruits and vegetables, the dirty dozen. And I think strawberries are way high on that list. In other words, taking unprocessed fruits and vegetables and identifying what are the 12 kind of that have the greatest amount of, pesticide and chemical residue on them, because some actually don't have very much. Like for example, oranges are not on that list because the sprays pretty much stay in the outside of the orange and the inside of the orange is protected. So if you peel the orange, I don't know very many people that eat orange peels. So if you peel the orange, you're not getting as much as you would otherwise. So what I'm going with this is, in this study, the Mediterranean diet, they did not parse out. They let people choose whatever fresh fruits and vegetables they wanted from the conventional produce vegetable section. Broccoli, strawberries, potatoes, whatever. They let people choose whatever that was. So they didn't have yet another subset that said, let's compare this with people not eating from the dirty dozen on the Mediterranean diet. That would be yet another whatever, a level of study that wouldn't it be interesting to say, we'll go Mediterranean, but we'll not eat any of the dirty dozen. I mean, for example, that would just be interesting, wouldn't it?
I think that would be fascinating. And they the one conclusion they came up with was conventional fruits, vegetables, and whole grain cereals were the most significant dietary source of synthetic chemical pesticides. So I don't have the parsing out of, produce, fruit and vegetable, like line items, but I think that would be fascinating to do that. But then you're also going to more likely move away from a real world situation if you do that. Right. Because somebody who's like, oh, I'm going to switch to a Mediterranean diet, but still eat conventional. The odds are they're probably not walking in there with the dirty dozen list and avoiding all of those foods. They're probably just going in and trying to figure out, okay, now I have to switch from the convenient processed food to a whole food. How am I going to do this? How am I supposed to cook with a whole food?
Right.
So.
Right.
So that you do lose the real world aspect of it, but I do think that would be a fascinating study.
Yeah. And by the way, we do list the dirty dozen in Beyond Labels. That is a list we have in there. So if you're wondering how to find that easily, you can get the book.
Yeah. And so let's end on that note. Let me say that this is why in the book, like I said, one of the very first tips is get off conventional processed food and choose organic processed foods. But also when we move you over into the whole food section, this is why we pretty much skip over we skip over even giving you the option of choosing conventional whole foods. We just say, basically, I think the tip is on stop counting calories, right? And choose the whole foods. And the tip is basically stop focusing on calories, focus on buying organic whole foods, right? So that's how we kind of like blurred right over that, was not promoting those conventional foods. But now we have at least a scientific study here to support that portion of the continuum that we debated for 6 months.
Yeah, and I think the most interesting part of it to me is that this is not, it wasn't a 10%, 20%. It was 300%. It was 1,000%. It was stunning, the amount of difference. So you can it's like a lot of things, if there's not enough deviation if it was 10%, well, you could say, well, that's probably within a study's margins of error, right?
Yeah.
But when it gets to be 300% and 1,000%, that gets your attention.
Yes. Yeah. And that caught my attention. That's why I said, oh my goodness, we have to share this, with our tribe, because I think we're falling prey to the dogma. Right. People in our field say it over and over and over enough that just eat the conventional whole foods, and we believe it. And I'm just saying it's not always the case that it's going to be the better choice.